she left me her photographs. And unfortunately, they didn't have much information about them. But the young boy on the cover of the book, The Silent Boy, was one of the photographs she left me. He's a boy wearing farm kind of clothing, and no other information except the date on the photograph is 1911. So he began, over the course of years, as I looked at that photograph, I began to hear the story he was telling me. And he told me his name. I mean, this sounds spooky, but that simply is the way it happened. And so I wrote the story that he told me, but I also perceived two things. One, there's a hat down over his eyes, shielding his face, and he's standing awkwardly, and I felt that he had done something terrible and had not meant to, and he was ashamed. So that was the basis of the story, but I began to sense also that he was handicapped and that he didn't speak. And so then I had to decide how to tell the story of a boy who can't tell it himself. And I realized that he was the date made at the time of my mother's childhood. So I had the young girl, contemporary of my mother's, tell the story, which threw it into the category for a writer, which is a fascinating challenge, of the unreliable narrator. The child is telling the events but doesn't understand them. And they're very complicated adult events, but you're hearing the story through the voice of the child. Then I illustrated it with old photographs, including the one that Aunt Mira had left, and some others of hers. But this old photograph is also in my family archives, and I included this in the book. The child's father, is a doctor. She goes with him when he goes to treat somebody who's been injured in this old mill. Okay? This is set in Pennsylvania, the town where my mother grew up. Then later in the book, the mill burns. Again, the doctor is called to treat burn victims. And eventually, at the end of the book, the ruins of the burned mill remained untouched for many years. When Austin and I were married in 1928, his parents and mine together bought the property and gave it to us as a wedding gift. In truth, the burned mill was bought by my grandmother, and she restored it. This was my childhood summer home in the mountains in Pennsylvania. It had been a flour mill. So I used all of those old photographs. I borrowed some from friends. The farm family, I'm illustrating one of the chapters, is actually Phyllis Reynolds Naylor's mother-in-law and her children. Okay, this is my grandson Reese, a very odd and interesting child. He's reading Newbery Green. I told the earlier group one odd story about Reese. Every time this child opens his mouth, it's something unusual. And I told them there was one other thing that I would tell the later group. This was quite adult. And that is when he was about this age, and I think he's 5 in this picture, he got mad at his mother one day. She had denied him something. And she said she could see him thinking of the worst, cruelest thing he could say to her. And finally he said, well, I just want you to know that I never really liked the taste of your milk. This is me, first grade. I never got to second grade. They skipped me up to third because I could already read, and so I always had this fantasy about second grade being something wonderful I had missed, and that's where Newbery Green came from. This is the 5th in the series about her. In this book, they're learning poetry. And Goody Bird, she's upside down here, but you can tell she's wearing green ruffles on her head. It turns out it's underpants, and she calls it her brain-warming hat. So in this particular scene, the teacher is talking. She looks around as the kids begin an assignment. 7 children, she counted, were now wearing underpants on their heads. Goody Bird had once again donned her pale green ruffles. Malcolm had tidy whiteys. Ben was wearing boxers with smiley faces. Tricia was wearing white cotton with little blue flowers, and both Beanie and Felicia Ann had pale pink. Chelsea, Mrs. Pigeon said, what is that on your head? Thong, Chelsea said. Borrowed from my mom. Anyhow, I've just finished the next one in which they deal with geography. And because the illustrator asked me to move them out of the classroom because she's sick of drawing the classroom, so they're out on the playground and it's February. And they're making a map out of packed snow. This is my mom as a young woman. I put her in here because she was the inspiration for this book. When my mother was, I don't know, in her 80s, she had a stroke. And she was in the hospital for a while, then there was nothing more they could do. But she was, I don't know, her mind was elsewhere. And so she was in a nursing home. At the end of 5 months, she woke up one day and she said, "Where am I? What am I doing here? Take me home." And we did, and she lived perfectly lucidly for several more years. But during that period of time, when she was in the nursing home, and where she didn't recognize my brother or me, she also often started to laugh and laugh or cry because she was experiencing something that we weren't privy to. And one time, my brother asked her what was wrong. She was crying, and she said, "I'm so sad, Dorothy's baby has died." My brother didn't recognize that reference, but I did. When I was 13 and my brother was 6 years younger, my mother's best friend was named Dorothy. Dorothy and Jim had no children, and then they were expecting a baby, and we were all very excited. And then Dorothy had a baby boy, and it lived only a few days. So clearly that's what was happening. My brother said to my mother, "Mother, when you were crying about Dorothy's baby," my brother's a doctor, he wanted to know what was going on in her brain. "When you were crying about Dorothy's baby, were you seeing Dorothy? Were you with Dorothy? Or were you remembering Dorothy?" And he told me that Mother looked at him as if he were an idiot. And she said, "In the theater directors have that magic to them." I'll skip that because it's too long. But this is what I want to show you. Here's grandmother on the beach with me again. And all the years I had seen this home movie, and then after I transferred it to videotape, stuck it in my own television to watch it one more time, and a friend was there, a lawyer in Boston who was a retired Navy officer. And he looked at it and he made me go back and show it several times, this scene. Of course, the people are moving around and the wind is blowing. But moving across the back, he pointed out, is the Arizona. Now, the Arizona, I had never noticed it. That, of course, was sunk at Pearl Harbor with 1,100 young men on it, and it's still there. And the memorial, the Pearl Harbor Memorial, is built on top of it. You can stand there and look down at the ship. So, what that means to me, or reinforces for me, is the fact that everybody's life has these moments of ecstasy and moments of tragedy. And they go back and forth, and they coexist, and that's why the world of the giver is so spooky, because it doesn't. It has only the good parts, the happy parts. Okay, this is the Silly Willoughbys, ignominiously illustrated by the author. Here are the horrible parents who want to get rid of their children, plotting ways to get rid of the children, and the children plotting ways to get rid of the parents. And this being a book for kids, and for me, kids always being the heroes, they're the ones who succeed. And at the end of the book, parents are, I'm sorry to say, dead, but in such an amusing way, and with smiles on their faces. This book started with a napkin in a restaurant where I was eating alone, and drew these strange people. There is a place where the children, well, the parents have gone on a trip, and then they sent a postcard home saying, by the way, the house is for sale. If somebody buys it, you move out, please. So the children disguise themselves when potential buyers come through, and this is one of the children disguised as a cactus. And, my grandsons posed for me. This is one disguised as a coat tree, and that's my grandson posing for me. And this is one disguised as a lamp. She didn't make it into the book. The lamp is not in the book. Okay, and this is the birthday ball, and there's Jules Pfeiffer, who'd been a friend of mine for years, and he kindly agreed to illustrate this book, which is about a princess with a serious problem, which is resolved at the end. Oh, I'm sorry, I jumped over too soon. This is the glossary at the end of the Willoughbys. A lot of big words in the Willoughbys, so the publisher suggested I add a glossary. This is my favorite definition of the glossary, for a reason I'll explain in a minute.